Today's date is October 18th, 2017. My name is Vincent Ventola here with John Grandy, and I'm interviewing Bryan Rubio. During her service, Bryan rose to the rank of Private First Class in the United States Marine Corps during the Iraq War. He was machine gunner in the 3rd Battalion. I'm interviewing Bryan Rubio as a part of the University of Central Florida's Community Veterans History Project. The interview is being conducted at UCF, and Bryan has agreed to allow this interview to be recorded. Mr. Rubio, could you start off by telling me when and where you were born?
I was born in Bayonne, New Jersey, and what else?
Do you have any siblings?
I have a sister. She doesn't live in the States though. She lives in Honduras, and she's older. So.
Okay. What did your parents do for a living?
Well, single parent. So I was raised by my mother, and she's basically worked in the factory her whole entire life. So.
How much education did you complete before going into the service?
Basically a high school degree. That was it.
I'm assuming did you have any other family members in the service before you went in?
No, absolutely, yeah.
So what made you enlist?
It was, so during high school, the whole entire thing with 9/11 happened, and 2-3 years after that is when I graduated, so it was kind of one of those things that I wanted to, I guess, give back to my country kind of thing. Like, I wanted to do something about it. So right after high school, probably like a few months later, is when I ended up going to boot camp. So
why did you enlist into the Marines?
Well, out of all the branches, the Marine Corps is the one with the highest standards. You can tell them apart from any other branch, and it was kind of one of those things that I just wanted the one that's going to challenge me the most. So
how was your boot camp experience?
Boot camp experience is definitely something different. It was a shock, at least for the first few weeks. Afterwards, you kind of get used to it a little bit. I ended up fracturing my foot towards the end of boot camp. So right after the crucible, I fractured my foot. So I didn't really get to walk or enjoy like the last few weeks before graduating. But it's definitely challenging. It was one of the most challenging things that I guess anybody could go through. Because of course you're like sleep deprived, you're basically out, PTing all day long, so it's kind of one of those things that is just completely different from your everyday life.
Can you tell me about your drill instructors?
Drill instructors. So the drill instructors, these are people that stay embedded in your mind for years. You could never forget who your drill instructors were, and you could still picture them to this day. The staff sergeant, which is the head drill instructor, he was like a father figure, and then of course the kill hat and the drill hat, which is the other two drill instructors, were kind of like your big brothers, and it was kind of one of those things that they used to do some funny things to other recruits, but they had like that tough love kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it was 3 of them, and to this day I could remember them like it was crystal clear, like it was yesterday.
Were they is it like positive memories, or is it?
Yeah, of course it's positive memories, because of course, they obviously love the Marine Corps. That's why they're doing, what they're doing at that point in time. And, their sole mission is to basically shape us into a Marine. So, they obviously do care. But yeah, they're positive. Of course, boot camp is boot camp, but overall, I mean, it's still a positive experience.
Can you tell me about the Crucible and your experience in it?
Oh, so the Crucible. So out of the Crucible, different groups were assigned to different drill instructors, and I ended up getting one of them, which is kind of like the one that we saw as the least hard. So I was actually quite happy about that. It definitely was one of those things that it just tested you 24/7. It was especially harder for me because I ended up fracturing my foot during the Crucible, halfway through. So it made it that much more challenging for me to be able to complete the remaining stuff for the Crucible, and then you have to march all the way back to the barracks. So I almost didn't make the Crucible. The hump back, I barely made it. I kept falling basically all the way back. I was like kind of one of the last guys, and I had to run to the front and fall back. But I finally made it, because if I fell back, I would have had to go back like a few weeks in boot camp and then pick up with the next one and then redo the Crucible, which I didn't want to do. So But it was definitely challenging because you're sleep deprived. You barely get to eat, and you have this physical endurance test that is just around the clock. There's no comfort in being dry or eating warm food. So it was definitely kind of one of those things that I'm happy that it happened. You get relieved at the end that you did it. You do feel that much better. And I mean, that's kind of like the staple of once you get through that, is like, all right, I made it through boot camp kind of thing. It's like, now you're a Marine. So
After graduating from boot camp, where did the Marine Corps send you?
after boot camp, I ended up going to North Carolina. You have to go through SOI if you're in infantry. And it's usually for like 3 months and change. Took a little while to pick up because I was still recovering from my injuries. So right at boot camp, I actually went back to Paris Island to finish recovering from that injury. And then after that, I went home for a little bit, and I came back to North Carolina, and then waited a few months to pick up with the next SOI class because I had to get clearance for medical for my foot. But after that, I picked up. I went through SOI, and fortunately for me, I was actually able to get my MOS, which was machine gunner. They give you like a wish list, and I had put machine gunner on top, infantryman, and then I think it was mortarman or something like that. So you never get your first pick, but I actually ended up starting 3-4 days as an infantryman, and then the sergeant calls me and tells me, hey, do you still want to be a machine gunner? And I actually ended up swapping out and becoming a machine gunner. So once you finish SOI, you graduate. You basically, that's going to be your MOS for at least the next 4 years, or 3.5 years at that point. So.
Wow, but being a machine gunner, was that like your goal at that point, or was it kind of just something that you were like just came upon and you're like, oh, this seems really interesting?
So I wanted to be a machine gunner going into the Marine Corps when you get signed up, but my ASVAB test was low, my score was low, so I couldn't get anything other than the combat cook and infantryman. So I actually wanted one of the recruiters, he was a machine gunner, and he's the one that kind of told me, kind of I guess planted that seed about being a machine gunner. So when I went in, I wanted to be a machine gunner, and of course I ended up getting it, so I was actually quite happy.
So while you were in, so your first duty station was Legion, North Carolina.
Yeah, Camp Legion, North Carolina. Yeah.
Can you tell me like what your day was like when you first arrived there?
When I first arrived, it was a shock because when I came in, I only came in with like a handful of guys, so it wasn't like a complete like 20, 30 guys that were coming in to check in. It was like literally like 4 or 5 guys that were checking in. So it was less of us, and when we get there, of course, you have the seniority. You have a bunch of guys there that they're already senior and stuff like that. They've been in for a year, 2 years. They already have a deployment. So you come in kind of like as the fresh, I guess, recruit almost, if you would. And you have to do all the bottom stuff. You're a bottom feeder. You have to police call every 2 hours and all that stuff. So it was a shock. Being away from home, it was another thing. You get homesick a lot, and but you quickly adjust to it. And then after that, it's just kind of you're just waiting to find out when your next deployment is. So after that, all you can concentrate is just working towards that next deployment. So basically doing all the field ops that they want you to do, and kind of perfecting your skill as a machine gunner and everything else that you're going to be doing in combat. So
what was the special training like while you were at Legion trying to be a machine gunner?
The training was definitely hard because everything that we did involved a hump. Basically, you have to hike. Everything that we did was just humps after humps after humps, and then of course fine-tuning the aspect of all the way from room clearing to shooting machine guns, doing convoys, and everything that basically pertains to our job. So it definitely was challenging, and you go through like different evolutions, like different phases of that training leading up to that. And one of the parts of the training is when you go to the West Coast, to Mojave Viper, and you do what's called CAX. And during that training is basically desert training. So you're literally out in the middle of the desert, and you're basically doing everything that you've been doing prior to that, except that now you're doing it in one piece. So you're applying your ability to riding convoys and everything that you have to do with the machine guns or whatever your job is because that's what you're going to be doing in Iraq. So it's definitely challenging though during the entire time.
So along with like your special training, what was your typical day at Legion like?
In Lejeune, typical day was basically starting really early in the morning, about 4 a.m., 5 a.m. To do PT. That was pretty much every day. We would run all the way from 3 to 10 miles for our company, and then after that we'll come back, we'll eat chow, and after that we'll basically we'll go to formation, and we'll find out what we're doing for that day. So let's say we're gonna practice reloading magazines or something like that, or if we're gonna do patrolling, whether we're doing it with the gear or without the gear, just to get the concept down. So whatever was planned for that day, we'll do that. We'll break for lunch, come back and do whether it's weapons maintenance or anything else that we had to do for that day or training. And then after that, of course, you'll have chow, and then we'll be released towards the end of the day. So you have a few hours to get your stuff together, do laundry or whatever. And then the next day, 4 or 5 o'clock, you redo it all over again. So
was there like a specific thing you enjoyed doing throughout the day? Like, was there a specific maintenance, cleaning, or anything of your weapon? Was there anything specific you liked?
During the first 2 years, you take pride in everything that you do. So you want to do everything to like the best of your abilities. So at first, I wanted to be, as fast as I could with reloading, my M4, my magazine, and I wanted to be really proficient in anything regarding the machine guns, because again, that was my job. So during the first 2 years, at least, I took a lot of pride and I enjoyed doing all that stuff. And towards the end, it kind of, changes because you already kind of perfected your craft, and it's just kind of like, all right, now you have to find other things that motivate you. But at least during the first portion, I was really motivated by my job, like what I was in there to do, which was everything with machine guns.
When did you find out you were being deployed?
For the first deployment, probably about a month, 2 months in from when I got out of SOI, I ended up finding out that we're doing our deployment. We didn't know the exact dates or any logistics on that. We just knew that we have to do the training, go to CAX, and then after that, you're deploying shortly after. So, yeah.
What were your first impressions of Iraq like?
I can still remember the first patrol. When we got to Iraq, it was kind of a gloomy day. It wasn't completely hot because we went during the beginning of the year, which is kind of still cold, and it was kind of one of those things that is a culture shock because of where you are. You're literally in the middle of nowhere, and you really don't have contact with the locals right away. So for the first few weeks and months, you're doing convoys and patrols and stuff like that, but you don't really get to interact, and you're completely aware of everything. Like you're literally, you go in there with the mentality like it's going to be combat. It's we're going to be getting shot at every day, but it's not really like that when you first go there. But the first impression was just, what did I get myself into? And basically just trying to do what my job was. So because I was lead truck gunner, so I had a lot of responsibility in my hands. But I guess that takes away from the initial shock, because you're having to concentrate on what you need to do. So
what was like your unit's mission over there?
What we were told by our the people that were in charge of us, so for example our lieutenants and captains and first sergeant and everybody else in the high in the ranks, we're there to basically establish a presence and also help the local, for example, Iraqi army or the Iraqi police get basically control of their country. And that's kind of what we're there for. That's literally what we were told, that we're there to establish a presence, of course, eliminate any threat along the way, which of course is the terrorists and anybody else who is a danger to us or even the local people.
Could you describe like a typical day in Iraq?
Well, there is no typical day in Iraq. Each day is different. One thing that is for certain is that you might not return alive, at the end of the day. The days weren't really, from AM to PM to us is just we worked around the clock. So it was just patrol after patrol after patrol, and then you do post, which is basically you're in one of the security positions, whether you're on top or walking the front gate or whatever the case is. So it's a combination of those two things. You're guaranteed to do a few patrols that day and be on post, and then very, very little time to do anything else like hygiene or eat or anything else that you want to do or work out or try to get a hold of the sat phone, because there was a long line to use the satellite phone. So, but anyways, overall each day would have, like I said, the patrols and post, and it was no 2 days were exactly the same. So there's always something different.
So once you actually started to interact with the locals, what was that like?
Your guard is up. Everyone's guard is up when you start interacting with the local people. Most of the local people were actually they would hide, or they would do everything possible to not interact with us, because of course they're afraid. They see a bunch of guys walking, and they're heavily armed, and you have trucks and stuff like that, and their guard is up, your guard is up. But I guess once you start talking to them, you start realizing that they're just like anybody else. Like, if you're walking down the street and you see a family with, mom, dad, and the kids, or whatever the case is, there is a huge language barrier, because we didn't know the language very well. We knew like little words here and there. But we could understand what they wanted. Most of the time they wanted, things like water or food or stuff like that, or medical care. Most of the time they wanted, they had somebody sick, so we'll get our corpsmen to go check them out. But the interaction between us overall, was positive, because again, they're human just like you are. And once you realize that is, you start getting that inside feeling of like, hey, I'm here for more than just establishing a presence. We're here to help these people, to make sure that they don't get killed or injured, by the terrorist threats.
So when you were over there, how did you communicate home while overseas?
Well, the first deployment was very hard. We didn't have any computers. We had one satellite phone, and I probably contacted, and the only person at that time that I really contacted was my mother. So probably like once a month I'll get to talk to her for maybe like not even 10 minutes, just to let her know, hey, I'm alive, everything is okay. Or if I needed to tell her to send me something in the packages, whether it's food or whatever I needed. So it was very limited during my first deployment. The second deployment, thankfully, we had a center with computers. The usage was still limited, but now we had computers, so it was a little bit easier to get a hold of our family. So I probably contacted my family at least once a week, or at least once every 2 weeks. So, but yeah, it was definitely very limited.
What would you say like the biggest difference between your two tours were?
The biggest difference between the two tours would be, at least for the second one, you know what to expect. The first one is like you're completely shocked on what's going on. You have no clue what's about to happen. So I guess the first one I would consider harder. The second one a little bit easier in that sense, but both of them are still completely different in regards to the day-to-day stuff. Yeah, we're doing patrolling. Yes, we're doing posts. We're doing missions, and but they're not exactly the same. So I would say the first one was definitely a lot harder. The second one was a little bit easier to a certain degree, but not all the way.
Were you afforded any leave while stationed overseas?
No, absolutely not. We were there for like 6 or 7 months, and during that time, there's no leave. There's no coming home. It's just you're there until everybody gets back. If you're in the working party that gets back to the rear first, then you come home in a few weeks. But I wasn't lucky enough, so we all come back together, and it'll be like at least 7 months by the time we get home from the time that we left. So.
So when you did finally come home, where did you what made you decide where you were gonna go?
What do you mean?
Did you go visit your mom or friends or family?
Well, when you get home, Everyone has to stay on base. So when we got home, my first deployment, I didn't have anyone waiting for me when you get off the bus. My mother, it was hard for her to come down from New Jersey. So I didn't have anybody waiting. So as soon as you get off the bus, most of the people, if the family is there, you get to, go to your families. And then the rest of us that have no one waiting for us, we'll go straight to your barracks. You find out what room you're assigned, you get the key, and you go drop your stuff off. And then usually within a day or two is when you'll have the final formation of where they'll let you go, and now you go on leave. Usually like a few weeks. You get to go home. The first deployment, I didn't go home. I stayed there. The second deployment, when we got back, I did have my mother at the time, her husband, and now my wife, then my girlfriend, were waiting for me. So
what would you say your most memorable experiences while you were on leave?
I guess being able to eat everything that you could possibly eat: pizza, Chinese food, wings, whatever it was. Even my mom's cooking, and being able to see her. Those are all pretty good memories that even to this day I can still remember every time I went home. So,
what was your most memorable experience while you were in Iraq?
Well, there's not one, but there's many, and I guess the way that my mind works is I piece several memories into kind of like one. So it's kind of, you see this one picture with kind of like sub memories of a lot of things that happen, but there's not one specific one. It's a collage of many memories. I wouldn't say most of them are good, but it's just events that happen, that couldn't change, and those events happen, and it is what it is. So,
are there any events that you would like to go into detail about?
Well, so one of the biggest ones was seeing the guy to the left and right of you. Your buddies that you're with 24/7. You're patrolling with them. You're doing everything. So, seeing that kind of from a third person perspective is just, that's one of the good memories, of having that brotherhood, knowing that that person to the left of me, to the right of me, or my team leader, they have my back 100%. So that's one of the very few good memories. And then in regards to the bad ones, were basically all the times that something happened, whether it was directly or indirectly. So, there's several things that happened. One of them is we got mortared. So we were at one of our FOBs, forward observation base, and I was actually outside filling sandbags with 3 other guys, and we ended up getting mortared. And the mortars, there's a wall, and we were on one side, of course, on the inside of the wall, filling sandbags, and right on the other side of the wall is where the mortars hit. So that's one of the vivid things that always stays in my mind. Another one was when we took RPG fire as we were doing a patrol. Thankfully, we missed. However, one of the companies from the Marine Corps, they had a kind of sub base near the highway. So they were confused where the fire was coming from. So they started shooting, and I can remember this like crystal clear. I was in the rear truck in the last vehicle as a Terry gunner, and we started taking fire, but I knew from what direction because of the sound of where it was hitting. And it turned out that was friendly fire. So it's kind of one of those things that, your own people, the same Marine Corps that you're with is shooting at you. I don't think that they meant it. It's just that I think that they got confused of where the fire was coming from, where the RPGs were coming from. But memories like that kind of, I guess, contribute to that collage that I said of memories.
So, why did you decide to leave the Marines?
So after 4 years, 2 deployments, being in infantry, you're physically, mentally, spiritually depleted in every which way. You have tested and pushed your life to the limits. You know what those limits are, and it's kind of one of those things that you grow mentally and physically in every way. You grow during those 4 years. at the end of the 4 years, you come to the road, the fork in the road of, well, do I want to continue to do this, or do I want to go back to the civilian world and kind of, start my life? And to me, it was just like, well, I already did my time. I served my country, and now it's time for me to start building my life. So that's kind of what was my driving force of, at the end of the 4 years, to get out.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about, like with your military experience while you were serving?
Anything else? So, during the 4 years, knowing what I know now, if I was to go back, I would change several things. I didn't take advantage of a lot of things while I was there, but I'm glad that I still did what I did while I was there, because one of the biggest things that I could take away during the 4 years from the Marine Corps is I was able to fine-tune my leadership skills. Even though I was a Lance Corporal, or even a private first class, or a private, which is the lowest 3 ranks of the Marine Corps for enlisted, but I was able to, even at those ranks, I was able to fine-tune the leadership side of stuff. And that's kind of one of those things that I'm glad I was able to learn, because you can't be taught how to be a leader from reading a book, from watching a video, or from hearing it from somebody else. Like, you have to kind of go through that experience for you to grow as a leader. And that's one of the biggest things that I could take away from the Marine Corps, is that I was able to fine-tune my leadership, and that's one of the I guess success factors that I benefit from now that I'm out of the Marine Corps. And of course, other stuff is when you lose buddies during the Marine Corps, whether it was during the deployment or after. So you're there to see firsthand of how that impacts people. So, for example, it was Sergeant Patterson. He had served 4 years prior to that. He did his deployments, got out, and came back into the Marine Corps, and then he ended up coming to our unit. He ended up being the vehicle commander, actually the section leader for my section, and then he was the vehicle commander for my truck, the truck that I was in as a Terry gunner. Probably one of the best leaders that I've ever had in any way, shape, or form. He really took care of us. We did the deployment, our second deployment, and to him it was probably like his third or fourth deployment. So we ended up coming back home, and weeks after, he ended up. Now, we were told he committed suicide, but there were also talks on that his wife poisoned him. So we never really found out what happened to him, but the point is that for somebody to do his time, get out, and come back, to continue serving, and then to have an ending like that is just kind of like it's a shock. I got really close to him during those 7 months that we were deployed. So for him to basically not be there anymore, it was just kind of like one of those things that you start to realize, and back it contributes to who you are and how you grow as a person during that time. So and there's many other guys that didn't make it back, whether they were killed in action or the same thing when we got back. They ended up dying in a car accident or motorcycle accident or something else. So those are the things that I guess that I always look back during the 4 years that I guess is stayed ingrained in my mind. So
what was it like? What did you do once you left the service?
So leaving the service was challenging. Once I left the service, first of all, the biggest question is that you're going to ask yourself is, what do I do next? Do I go home? Do I start somewhere else? Do I go back to school? Do I try to find a job just so I have a way to pay my bills? So there's a lot of things going through my mind when I left. I was married at the time for a few months. I was married in March of 2009. I left the Marine Corps in October 2009. So my wife and I decided to move to Central Florida. And the day that I left was a Friday afternoon. I picked up my DD-214 and we got in a U-Haul truck and we drove down to Florida. When we drove down here, we didn't have a place to stay. We didn't have jobs lined up. We barely had a few $100 in the savings account. And it was kind of one of those things that we need to make do with what we have. We need to be resourceful and figure it out. So we got here on Saturday morning, and on Saturday morning we stopped by one of the apartment complexes. So we ended up getting the apartment the same day that we got here. And then after that, it was just like, well, now we need to figure out what we're going to do in regards to income. I couldn't find a job. I applied to every job. Unfortunately, I have a driving record during the Marine Corps, so the one job that I was counting on when I left the Marine Corps was a security job. And unfortunately, my record came up during their background checks, so they basically denied me. So at that point, I was just lost, because it's like I was counting on that job to provide for me, and now I can't get that job. So I applied for everywhere, Lowe's, Home Depot. I applied so many jobs, and each job either told me I'm overqualified or underqualified. And I couldn't get a job, and it was just like I couldn't even get a minimum wage job, and it really sucked. My wife ended up working at a law firm as a receptionist shortly after, and in January of 2010 is when I started school. So I knew school was going to be part of the biggest thing that I was going to do when I left the military. So then that's when I started going to school in January, and ever since January 2010 to now 2017 is when I ended up going to school nonstop. I made that my number one mission and goal is to get my master's degree, which I finally completed. But during that transition time, I definitely was a different person. Now I can look back and talk about it. Then I couldn't accept it as the reality, but I was really depressed for at least the first year after getting out. Everything was hard. From my wife would tell me, you need to take a shower. It's been 3-4 days. You haven't left the house. You haven't gotten a haircut in 2-3 months. You haven't shaved. And she obviously understood, of why those things were happening. But that was probably the hardest transition from military to civilian, because you're lost. You have nothing else to do, and it's kind of one of those things that you need to figure as you go. Nothing or anyone could have prepared you to, I guess, to be successful after getting out. They try to give you classes and stuff like that, but it didn't make much of a difference. I finally ended up getting a job working for the state in July of 2010, and I was so excited and happy. It didn't pay much. It was only $23,000 a year as a driver license examiner, but it was a job. And I was actually pretty happy that I got that job, because number one, it was going to help me get out of that rut of being depressed, because now I need to wake up, I need to hygiene, shave, get dressed and go out and do an actual job 40 hours a week. So that helped out a lot, and I think that I ended up getting that job because of the supervisor. She knew I was a veteran, and she believed in me. She gave me a chance. So it was kind of one of those things that I'm happy I came across her, and she gave me a shot at working there at the driver license. And then so after that I stayed working there for a little bit, and eventually I ended up getting better from the treatment from the VA. So going to PTSD meetings with in a group setting, so you have other veterans from different eras, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, and before me, after me. So that group therapy and all that, being in that environment helped. I also did counseling sessions and stuff like that. So all those things contributed in me actually getting out of that depressed stage after I left the military.
So do you remain in contact with the people with whom you served?
Very few, but it's weird because I don't talk to them on a daily basis. But when I do talk to them, it could be like, I don't know, once a year, once a few, every 8 months or something like that. But when you talk to them, you could just pick right up. You start talking to them, hey, how are you? How's your family? And it's like kind of like it's like you never stop talking to them. But it's very few. Some of them actually moved to Central Florida. There's two of my buddies, and we did the same deployments. We're in different sections, and I talk to them, pretty often. They do work, so they're gone for 3 months out of the year, and then there's a few other guys that live in different states that I still stay in contact with, and then the rest of the guys that I was with, I stay in contact with them through Facebook. And same thing with any of those buddies. It's just when you talk to them, it's like you could pick right up, and sometimes you joke about the stuff that you remember, even though it was like 8-9 years ago or 10 years ago. But yeah, it's only a handful of guys that I stay in contact with.
Were you able to apply any of your military training experience to your civilian life?
Yeah, so I first had to figure out how can I transfer those skills and abilities to the civilian world, because some of them have to be modified. Of course, in the civilian world, as a supervisor, you can't yell at your subordinates. You can't do that. In the military, that's okay. So I had to fine tune them. The leadership, like I mentioned earlier, is one of the biggest ones that I was able to benefit from the most, because when I ended up getting supervisor roles after I left the military, that leadership skill came into play. And there's many others. So all the way from the discipline of always being on time, never being late, like little things like that, I was able to still apply in the civilian world and make it easier for me to be in the civilian world. There's other ones. So another one that was very handy was the ability to make a decision really fast with limited amount of information. So whether you're a supervisor or you're working doing your daily tasks in whatever job, it would come in handy. And I know for some of the challenges that I had as a supervisor, especially like a new supervisor years later, I was able to use that in my day-to-day transactions, and it helped me a lot. It helped me to be a better person also. Let's see, another skill. It's not, I wouldn't say a skill, it's more like the ability to have confidence in how you do something, and how you implement something, or how you deliver, whether it's a presentation. So I was able to capitalize on that throughout the bachelor's and the master's, because we had to do a lot of presentations. So to have that confidence and ability to talk loud in front of a group of people, I was prepared for that. So I was actually quite happy that that I had those abilities, leadership, to being able to make decisions quickly and being able to present, and of course having that discipline and doing everything. So those things have contributed to my success even to this point. So, and I think I will still continue to use it, pretty much until forever.
Do you belong to any veterans groups?
Veterans groups, there's not one in specific. I do still go to the Vet Center, and we have meetings with other veterans. So I stay doing things like that, but I don't have a direct association with like a specific group.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell me about, like whether it be like your military service life before or after your military service? Like anything that like stands out to you?
Well, I guess I have something in regards to all three of those: before, during, and after. The before is just you're completely naive of what the world is, the real world. I got out of high school, and it's kind of, you have a notion of, basically nothing. You don't really know anything for what it is. So that's the before. When I got to the Marine Corps, it was just kind of like, you're awake now. You kind of have an idea of like, okay, well, this is what life is. This is what reality is, and you have to take it for what it is. And then, of course, going through all those things that made me a better person, and even the hardships, all contributed to making me the person who I am today. So, and then after getting out, it's just kind of, I guess, is you graduate, so you get to piece everything together. It's like, all right, well, the life before the Marines, during the Marines, and then in combination with what I've been doing up to this point. So then now you can piece everything together, and then your outlook is still different than it was before, during, and right after. So, but my ability to, and this is once I left the military, my ability to stay consistent and determined getting the educational background that I have now is because of the Marine Corps, and knowing that I would never experience anything as, and when I say bad, it's I don't mean bad in the sense of the Marine Corps is bad to me. No, in the situations that I was in, the things that I experienced, the combat, everything else, I know that I would never, ever, ever, ever be in that again. And obviously that was my limits, that pushed me to my limits. So now coming out of the military and looking back, it's like nothing will be as hard as that was. So going to school and all that stuff, it's just like, yeah, it's going to be challenging. It's going to be hard. You're going to, have nights where you stay up to 3, 4 o'clock in the morning studying and stuff like that. And you have to go to work, but it still wouldn't amount to even half of what I did in the military. So it's kind of like knowing that, it's like, I feel like I could achieve anything and take success to that next level. And really, really reach the goals that I want to reach. So I guess that's the part of after the military.
Those are all the questions I have for you.
Oh, okay.
So, thank you, Mr. Rubio, for your service and for your time here with us today. The University of Central Florida Community Veterans History Project, that I greatly appreciate. We will be in touch with you with a copy of the interview is ready, and please feel free to contact the Registrar's office with any questions you might have.
Sounds good.